Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel, two big names, popular figures in MAGA world, looking to secure their spots in President Donald Trump's cabinet. They are currently facing their hearings on Capitol Hill.
Patel, some might say surprisingly, just distanced himself from Trump on a hot topic. Here he is.
We discussed in our private meeting, Senator, I have always rejected any violence against law enforcement, and I have, including in that group, specifically addressed any violence against law enforcement on January 6th, and I do not agree with the commutation of any sentence of any individual who committed violence against law enforcement.
So do you?
Patel did blast Biden, however. Let's listen to that.
I also believe America is not safer because President Biden's commutation of a man who murdered two FBI agents, Agent Kohler's and Williams' family, deserve better than to have the man that point blank range fired a shotgun into their heads and murdered them released from prison. So it goes both ways.
So far, Patel seems to be earning unanimous support from Republicans.
Republican Senator Tom Tillis, for example, told Fox News Digital yesterday that he's pushing for Patel as head of the FBI. Tillis is noteworthy because he was initially hesitant on another Trump cabinet pick, Pete Hegseth, but did end up supporting him.
Here's a viral Patel clip from September 2024.
And the biggest problem the FBI has come out of its intel shops. I'd break that component out of it. I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopening the next day as a museum of the deep state. And I'd take the 7,000 employees that work in that building and send them across America to chase down criminals. Go be cops. You're cops. Go be cops. Go chase down murderers and rapists and drug dealers and violent offenders. What do you need 7,000 people there for?
Gabbard, however, is another story. There are three main issues her opponents tend to cite. Her visit with former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in 2017, her former stance on FISA Section 702, and her defense of Edward Snowden.
Snowden, as a lot of you know, was a government contractor who leaked troves of classified government data for what he believed was informing the public about gross abuses of surveillance. Gabbard has introduced a bill during her tenure in Congress that would protect whistleblowers like Snowden, who is viewed by many civil liberties supporters as a hero.
Snowden was, however, charged with espionage, and he now lives in Russia. Senator Susan Collins of Maine told the New York Times, "One of my greatest concerns is how she, Gabbard, views Edward Snowden in light of the resolution that she co-authored with Matt Gaetz, calling for all criminal charges against him, which were extremely serious and involved sharing highly classified information with our adversaries, to be dropped." Then there's her former opposition to FISA Section 702. As the editors of National Review, a conservative publication, wrote earlier this month, she long opposed Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which allows us to monitor the communications of non-Americans located outside the United States. This is a little like a Secretary of Defense nominee being opposed to building tanks. Then, of course, we have Gabbard's meeting with Assad in 2017.
Gabbard had warned that removing Assad would turn Syria into chaos and allow for terrorists to fill the power vacuum.
Here's Democrat Senator Mark Kelly on Face the Nation recently discussing Gabbard's trip.
What concerns me more, especially about that trip, is it was common knowledge that Assad was gassing the civilian population, using chemical weapons against the population multiple times. And she didn't argue about those, but she took the time and the effort to make a case that there were two cases, and she used, experts that were not credible to try to prove that he was not using chemical weapons in those two instances. And I have a hard time understanding why you would want to do that, to use your political capital.
But in Gabbard's defense, according to a report from Aaron Mate for Real Clear Investigations, Gabbard has never offered support for Assad or issued a blanket denial of chemical weapons used by his recently ousted government. In 2020, Gabbard described Assad as a brutal dictator and said that there is evidence that both his forces and anti-government insurgents had used chemical weapons. Vice President J.D. Vance wrote on X, "In their own way, both Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. represent parts of the new coalition in our party. To say they're unwelcome in the cabinet is an insult to our new voters. To reject their confirmation is to reject the idea that President Trump decides his cabinet." And even Edward Snowden himself chimed in, writing, Tulsi Gabbard will be required to disown all prior support for whistleblowers as a condition of confirmation today. I encourage her to do so. Tell them I harm national security and the sweet, soft feelings of staff in D.C. That's what passes for the Pledge of Allegiance. So 2 figures to discuss, Kash Patel and Tulsi.
A lot here.
Where would you like to start?
Well, I would have more of a criticism of Kash Patel than I would of Tulsi Gabbard, but I know that you're pro-Tulsi Gabbard.
And Kash Patel. Actually, I think I'm unequivocally pro-Kash Patel.
Okay. Well, I will take the anti-Kash Patel position then.
But you were probably glad to hear him acknowledge that he disagreed with. In fact, it's rare to hear anyone even express disagreement with Donald Trump. I disagree with similarly commuting the sentences of people who engage in violence, and so does Kash Patel, and that's comforting to hear, is it not?
I thought that was to his credit that he said that today, and I think that, obviously, I think he's right. We have discussed January the 6th and my feelings about what happened on that day, and yours quite a lot. I thought the commutations were a disgraceful and shameful moment. In relation, though, to Kash Patel more generally, what I was struck by watching the clip of him distancing himself from Trump in that way was how different that person appears from the Kash Patel that we showed on those other clips, talking in this cartoonish fashion about how he would empty out the Hoover building on day 1, send people across the country to chase criminals, as if it's some sort of cops and robbers game, or as if the intelligence element of police work doesn't exist. I find him very dubious in that way. I find him very dubious in his propensity to ventilate lies about people helping Joe Biden to rig elections. And, I also find his behavior toward Trump in general very, very craven, which is why I'm surprised at the distancing over January the 6th. There was a CPAC appearance back in 2023 when, I just love this quote because of its ludicrousness, "We're blessed by God to have Donald Trump be our juggernaut of justice."
Well, he's supportive of Donald Trump, and he says pro-Trump things to say. And I can't co-sign every statement he's ever made, obviously, and I'm sure if he might have said things related to January 6th or the election that I disagree with. But when I hear him say that he wants to reform the FBI and get it back to more of a law enforcement purpose, that there are people doing duplicative intelligence analysis there that they don't even know why they're doing it, that seems fine with me. I also appreciate, and this has been undercovered, that he actually has history as a public defender. Mm-hmm. He worked in Florida representing drug dealers, murderers, smugglers, and I think that is it because there is, and sometimes it's not political, the weaponization of law enforcement, just the tremendous power of the criminal justice system to grind down people. I think it is good to have someone who's seen the other side of the legal system and has an inclination in their head about what it's like for people accused of things, even when they're guilty, if they're guilty of sin.
But let me come in on that, Robbie, because I agree with the point that you have just made in an abstract sense. And to be fair to you, I've no doubt that you're making that in good faith. You genuinely believe that often the police and justice element of society can be overly repressive. And I think that's fine, and an argument that lots of people on the Liberal side also share. I think the problem is attaching that good faith argument to someone like Kash Patel, who is so craven toward Trump, who is so prone to these inflammatory statements of all kinds, and who has talked about utilizing the mechanics of that system to go after people who are Trump's enemies and by extension his enemies. That's where I think the argument just gets completely separated. What he's talking about is using those powers to which you rightly object simply to pursue different people.
Well, let's move to Tulsi Gabbard, who I like a lot of what she has to say and represents. I was dismayed personally to see her flip on this FISA a 702 authorization thing, which is very, very much something that civil libertarians are opposed, and we're happy about her because she was also against. She said that there were sufficient reforms to it, and now she's supportive of it. She said that to win some support from lawmakers. So that was actually an example of her, catering to more mainstream or establishment support, where I actually liked her initial position much better. Then, the kind of bipartisan security state going after her for thinking that Edward Snowden did something, yes, illegal, but also heroic and important, and should be that, and that the importance of the contribution should be acknowledged because we want to incentivize whistleblowers to speak up when our government is engaged in illegal behavior or wrongdoing. That is a good thing. I totally agree with her on that. I agree with people on both sides of the political spectrum who share that view from I don't know what their exact view is, but presumably from AOC type people all the way to Rand Paul type people. And that's a good thing. So not only does it not disqualify her in my view, it's to her credit. And to see that be the reason that establishment Republicans are wary of her and establishment Democrats don't like her is very that makes me concerned about them, not her.
I think that is fair enough. I think some of the criticism. I'm in a bit of a nuanced position where she's concerned, because I think some of the criticism of her is unfair, actually, and then I think some of it's pretty fair. So like the meeting with Assad, for example, I wouldn't defend at all, and I think that's a huge question mark over her. On the flip side, on the more sympathetic to her side, Hillary Clinton basically came out and said straight out that Tulsi Gabbard was a Russian asset, without, as the New York Times always says about Donald Trump, accusing without evidence. Or, so you can't just come out and make those kind of statements about people as a blanket assertion without anything to back it up. So I think that is unfair. I think sometimes Gabbard makes kind of nuanced arguments herself, like talking about, NATO expansionism, for example. I am not of the view that NATO expansionism justifies invading Ukraine, but I think that it is a valid topic to talk about, and sometimes I think people who criticize her imply that it's not a valid topic to talk about, and I don't love that position.
Indeed. Well, I predict they will both be confirmed, but we will have to see. Lots more coming next, including why did Vivek Ramaswamy really leave Doge? Stay tuned.